Emperor Domitian was one of three emperors that who made up the Flavian dynasty, which lasted for many years in the 1st century. Although I don't remember when his father Vespasian became emperor. I know Vespasian died in 79, and during Vespasian's reign, he sent his son Titus to subdue Judea. And so in 70, the Second Temple falls. Obviously, there's a story of Titus entering the Holy of Holies. And then 73 is the Siege of Masada, which is the complete end of the Jewish war. And the Sicarii, the last remaining members of this resistance movement, surrender at that place in 73. So Vespasian dies in 79, and Titus, his eldest son, takes over. But Titus, I believe he died of a fever at the age of 44, so he dies in the year 81. And then Domitian takes over, and Domitian has a long reign until his assassination in 96. So that is 15 years of Domitian's reign. So of the three emperors that make up the Flavian dynasty, only two are deified. That would be Vespasian and Titus. Amazingly, Titus is deified despite only being emperor for a little over 2 years. But Domitian is unique because Domitian was not deified. In fact, he was, I forgot the term, but the Imperial Senate, they basically damned him. They completely erased his memory. So anyway, as I've discussed in many videos, this isn't my first one, the first recording I should say, that the religion of Christianity is a Flavian invention. It was invented to completely subdue and humiliate the Jews of Judea. The Christian religion, specifically the early Gospels, the Jewish Gospels of Mark and Matthew, this was to give the Jews a Messiah, because they were waiting for their Messiah. They got their Messiah through this creation called Jesus. But also, if you read the Gospel of Mark, it's kind of humiliating for Jews because obviously these names come from the War of the Jews, such as Simon the Zealot. Any Jew reading this or hearing it, I don't know if they were literate back then, but anyone hearing this, they would know immediately that this was a joke on the Jews. So again, Titus and his father Vespasian, they developed this Christian religion to be what I call a secret imperial cult specifically for Jews or enslaved Jews. Jews that had been given the mark of the beast. They were conquered people. And from what I've read, from what I've studied, is this early religion of Christianity didn't go over very well because obviously, and as even modern scholars point out today, the Jewish Messiah, the expected Messiah, was not supposed to be killed, much less a crucified criminal. The Messiah is supposed to be a king. And so this Messiah that Titus and Vespasian created, on the surface, it's kind of good. I guess it's like this spiritual Messiah, kind of like this. He teaches humility and being passive. If you read the Beatitudes in the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about basically being passive. But it just, from what I understand, from what I've studied, is the Jews rejected this. What the Jews did accept was rabbinical Judaism, which, if you do some research, rabbinical Judaism actually was started under Titus. because the original Judaism was centered around the temple. New rabbinical Judaism was centered around the law. So the Judaism we have now is also a Roman creation, but it doesn't have Jesus. It doesn't have the created Messiah and the gospel story. So again, this special imperial cult was, for Jews. Obviously Gentiles could join it, but it was for Jews, and also it contained the law. I mean, it was for Jews, so Jews still kept the law. I mean, even if you look at the early Gospels of Matthew, Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verse 18 says, "No letter of the law shall be changed." And also, specifically in Matthew chapter 15, verse 24, Jesus says, he explains that he was sent to teach the lost sheep of the tribe of Israel. So again, this new Christian faith was really for the Jews. It was for the Jewish people to have a Messiah. And again, Jesus is the new temple. There's no need for the temple, which obviously we see in rabbinical Judaism. There's no need for the temple. We have the law. So you see this early form of Christianity in Mark and Matthew. So again, Titus dies of a fever in 81. Domitian takes over, and obviously Domitian takes over Titus and Vespasian's cult. He knew about this hidden imperial cult for captured Jews, or I guess Jews in general. I'm not really sure if it was just for the captured Jews of Judea, or they were trying to spread it to all the Jews in the empire. I'm not really sure. But again, the Jews, the reason Vespasian and Titus created this religion, Christianity, was not so much to give the Jews a Messiah, but also get them to inadvertently worship Caesar. As I explained in a video talking about the proof within Revelation, Jesus is a representation of the 5 deified Caesars, kind of a Caesar in and of himself. As you read in Revelation chapter 10, the 7th angel is this man of light. He's not a Caesar. And so, and I also mentioned in that other video about the proof in Revelation that also Carota, the Italian linguist, he's pointed out many similarities between Jesus Christ and Julius Caesar, that they both share a similar passion. They both die at the 9th hour. They're both given away by a kiss of death, by Judas, or by, I believe is Brutus in Julius Caesar. But anyway, so again, the Jews, these captured Jews, not unknowingly, actually worship Caesar through the worship of this created Messiah, this literary character. So Domitian becomes emperor, and he realizes, number one, the Jews don't want this new religion. They know it's fake. The Jews accept rabbinical Judaism, which is what we have today. But also, you probably noticed that there were many Gentiles that were interested in this religion. There's a unique religion from the East. But they, again, the Roman elites were successful. They were able to get people to worship Caesar through this literary created Messiah, Jesus. And so Domitian, I believe, had an epiphany at one point. We don't know a lot about who Domitian was. The best information we have is from the historian, the royal historian. He wrote about all the Caesars. He lived around the time of Domitian. I believe his name is Suetonius. I'll leave a link in the description of his book on Domitian. But we know that Domitian was a narcissist because he mandated everyone call him Lord God. Not just Lord, not just Caesar or Master, Lord God. All right. So Domitian, he really thought about this whole imperial cult another level. He knew it was a joke, and he didn't really care. But he realized that he could get not just he wasn't able to get the Jews really to successfully, go to that religion, but it could work for the whole empire. His epiphany was that he could get the entire empire united under one religion, under one God, worshiping one Messiah, who is a composite character, a representation of the deified Caesars. He realized, Emperor Domitian realized it was the most perfect religion for the Empire of Rome. And again, all of it's in the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation was written by Domitian. And I'm not going to give any details, as I talked about it in another video. I don't want to make this video really long. But Domitian saw how the Empire of Rome could thrive if it were united under one religion, under one God. And so this was his epiphany. And so we have this other character that was developed under Domitian, which is Paul. Paul is a literary character like Jesus, but Paul is the great apostle. He's the greatest apostle, even though he never met Jesus. And Paul is very much against the Torah. I mean, he doesn't say that you can't. I mean, again, the very first letter, the very first epistle is Romans, and the longest one too. Paul says, you don't need the law. Christ is the law. Christ is the fulfillment of the law. This is very much different than Matthew and Mark in the early Gospels, because the early Gospels actually taught about the law. Jesus preached the law. But here you have Paul, who said Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. And so now Domitian hit the start button and spread this Eastern religion cult, imperial, what I call the Neo-Imperial cult, throughout the empire. And so from Titus, again, just summarizing, with Vespasian and Titus, they started out with the hidden imperial cult specifically for Jews. And Domitian transitioned it to being a hidden Neo-Imperial cult for the empire. I suspect that Domitian got the idea that people didn't want to worship a man. People wanted to worship a god like Dionysus or Jupiter. They want to worship a Messiah. They don't want to worship Caesar. Especially these new nations would join and become part of the Roman Empire, and that was the rule. You had to worship Caesar. Well, with Jesus, with this Christianity, you don't have to directly worship Caesar, because the deified Caesars are all within Jesus. It's absolute genius. And Domitian was a narcissist, and he was a genius too. And it's my belief that the 7 seals that are described within Revelation are referring to the 7 original letters of Paul, of the character of Paul. We refer to these letters as the lucky 7. These are the original letters of Paul. That's what I think, although I can't really prove it. But Paul also is a creation. But I also show in another video that Paul and Jesus have kind of a similar voice. There is this Gnostic element between the preaching and parables of Jesus and also the preaching of Paul. There is a similar Gnostic voice. I'll get to that in another video. But thank you for listening.